Welcome to another edition of Life, Love, and Philosophy. This is the seventh in a series of programs I'm doing on the great French wisdom writer Michel de Montaigne. Montaigne has become famous for the many essays he wrote. He is regarded by many as a wisdom writer because he stimulates our thinking about what might be true or false, about life and about human nature, and many other aspects of daily living. His essays can help us to live more fulfilling lives. I've mentioned in previous programs that Montaigne lived in the 16th century in France. Among his essays I focused on in the previous programs I've done on him are the following. I've zeroed in on his essay entitled On the Education of Children, and another essay entitled On Books, and further essays entitled On the Art of Conversation, and last week I focused on his essay entitled On Friendship. Today, my focus will be on Montaigne's essay entitled On Solitude. First, a brief review of some of the points I made last week, again, when I zeroed in on his essay entitled Friendship, or On Friendship. Montaigne distinguished between everyday commonplace friendships and the highest kind of friendship, which he claimed is characterized by unusual honesty, affection, trust, and which is spiritually uplifting. He claimed that he had such a friendship for about 4 years when he was in his 20s with a gentleman named Etienne de la Boutier. This friendship ended after about 4 years when his friend died. And Montaigne, who lived to the age of 59, claimed he never again had such a friendship, such a spiritually uplifting friendship. And why so? What specifically was so great about this friendship he had with Etienne? Well, Montaigne says each could reveal his innermost thoughts and feelings, and each could be trusted not to reveal these intimacies to other people. Montaigne claimed that the highest kind of friendship is, and I'm quoting him, a spiritual thing, and the soul is purified by its practice. Such a friendship, he said, is possible only between people of unusual integrity and unusual empathy. Montaigne claimed that such a friendship is very rare. And again, most of the writers in history who have written about friendship pretty much agree with Montaigne that the kind of friendship he had with Etienne, this very spiritually uplifting friendship, where each one had great trust in the other, is very rare and is not in the category of common everyday friendships. Indeed, Montaigne claimed that the people we generally call friends are, according to him, really acquaintances. I commented last week that while most people, perhaps, will never have the benefit of the highest kind of friendship, that doesn't mean that lesser kinds of friendship cannot be worthwhile and cannot be life-enriching. Since Montaigne believed that very good friendships are very rare, he believed it was very important that we learn to enjoy our own company. Which brings me to his essay entitled On Solitude. Like so many famous thinkers, Montaigne very much enjoyed solitude. He spent much of the last 20 years of his life reading and writing. He believed that to live a fulfilling life, it was necessary to be able to enjoy one's own company. Among the advantages he cites, again in his essay on solitude, among the advantages he cites of being alone are the following. He says it can help us to avoid the evil influences in society, and also that solitude can help promote virtue in us. Isn't this one of the reasons that some people over the centuries have chosen to be monks and nuns and chosen to live in monasteries and nunneries? The idea was, for many of them, that the world is a pretty evil place. And if they wanted to save their souls, they would have to divorce themselves in many ways, not completely, of course, but in many ways from society. Mahatma Gandhi, in his autobiography, reflects some of Montaigne's thinking, in that Gandhi points out that one of the things he learned in life is that we human beings take in vice much more readily than virtue. Again, according to Gandhi, we take in vice much more readily than virtue. Isn't this one of the reasons, by the way, that parents are usually very concerned about whom their children hang out with? Montaigne claimed that man is both a sociable and unsociable creature. How so? Well, here are Montaigne's own words. There is nothing so unsociable and sociable in nature as man. The one by his nature, the other by his vice. Montaigne claimed that if the wise person is given a choice, and I'm quoting Montaigne now, again, if the wise person is given a choice, he will choose to be alone. He cannot think himself sufficiently rid of vice if he must contend with it in other men. What do you think? One must understand that Montaigne had a pretty low opinion of average human nature. And why so? Well, again, one must understand the times Montaigne was living in. I mentioned he lived in 16th century France. And when he was alive, there was a brutal civil war raging in France between Protestants and Catholics. Protestants and Catholics were at each other's throats. They often killed each other. And indeed, the laws of France often reflected religious prejudice. Montaigne, in one of his essays, indeed in more than one of his essays, claimed that he often lived in fear of his house being invaded by religious fanatics and perhaps killing him and his family. Again, besides living in the time of civil wars in France, Montaigne also had a low opinion of human nature because he was a student of history, and he saw so much violence in history. Indeed, in one of his essays, he talked about how the Spanish treated the Indians of the New World, how Columbus and the Spanish conquistadors who followed Columbus tortured Indians, enslaved Indians, and killed Indians. And Montaigne claimed that the majority of people in France during the religious civil wars, and the majority of people in Spain when that country was brutalizing the Indians of the New World, that the majority were pretty much reticent, went along. According to Montaigne, they went along with the evil. So again, one of the reasons for his low opinion of human nature. Another advantage Montaigne claimed we can gain from being alone is that Solitude is a form of self-reliance. It's a form of freedom. Montaigne said that we should not depend too much on others for our happiness. He said, and again I'm quoting him, we must, for the most part, entertain ourselves with ourselves. This reminds me of something that writer Andy Rooney commented about years ago in one of his columns. He said that some of his smartest friends had the ability to stay home on a Friday night or a Saturday night and enjoy their own company. We also need solitude, according to Montaigne, to help dehypnotize us from social hypnosis. Again, we need solitude to help us dehypnotize ourselves from social hypnosis. And what am I talking about here? What is Montaigne talking about here? Well, we need to sort out our thoughts, to escape society's conditioning, to find out what we really think, what we really believe. Since again, society can so often confuse us. Montaigne said this, "It is not enough to get remote from the public, but rather," he said, and again I'm quoting him, "a man must flee from the popular conditions that have taken possession of his soul and come again to himself." We need solitude to help free us from the harmful conditioning that exists all around us. I am referring specifically to the propaganda, the half-truths, the lies that human beings in America and elsewhere in the world, in fact, all over the world, are exposed to in their environment. In America, there is much propaganda and half-truths which come from the media, for example, sometimes unintentionally, by the way. In that, television, the advertising industry, the movie industry can often confuse us as to how to go about living a fulfilling life, about how to go about trying to achieve more tranquility in our lives. I think it's fair to say that in general, television and the advertising industry are not good guides to how to live a good life. Historian Will Durant, on the subject of truth, wrote this, and I think this is very germane to what I'm saying and to what Montaigne said. Durant said this, "There are few things in the world so unpopular as truth, and the backbone of men and states is a concatenation of romance." Thoreau said something similar, and again I'm quoting him. "Simple sincerity and truth are rare indeed, are rare indeed." I think most of the famous thinkers over the centuries would agree with both Durant and Thoreau. What do you think? I know that in my life, solitude has often been, in fact, usually been therapeutic. I find that the combination of solitude and silence can help pitch me to the highest levels of thought, at least for me, the highest. Maybe I should use the word higher. That being alone, in silence, can help me to access a much higher level of thinking and can help me to think much more clearly. And also, being alone, in silence, can often, in fact, almost always, help me to relax more and to access a kind of tranquility I find is almost impossible when the television is on or when I'm with many people. Thomas Merton, I think, provides some illumination here. Thomas Merton was a very famous 20th century American monk, perhaps the most famous 20th century American monk. He was not even a Catholic until he was about 21, 22 years old, at which time he converted. And since he was having some serious psychological problems, in fact, he described himself as being emotionally empty. He described himself this way in his autobiography. He decided, on the advice of someone, to visit a monastery in Kentucky. It was a very famous monastery, still is a very famous monastery, the monastery of Gethsemane in Kentucky. Later, again, after visiting the monastery, Montaigne converted to Catholicism and sometime later became a monk. Well, what does this have to do with solitude? Well, in his autobiography, which I highly recommend, by the way, it's entitled The Seven-Story Mountain. In his autobiography, Merton, Thomas Merton, this famous monk, talks about the first time he entered the monastery. And he talks about the first half hour or so he was in the monastery. And he mentioned that it was very quiet, and that one of the reasons it was very quiet is that the monks, these Catholic monks, generally conversed with each other, not through words, but by sign language. And Merton, again, in his book, describes the silence, and he said this, and I'm quoting him. Thomas Merton said, "The silence of the monastery spoke to me, and spoke to me more eloquently than any voice had ever spoken to me." I think it's unfortunate that many people in our society fear solitude and silence. I think it's unfortunate that so many people, when they are alone, for example, must turn on the BlackBerry or cell phone and deprive themselves of the experience they might have if they were in silence and perhaps could access a much higher level of tranquility that they will not access, I think, generally speaking, by the use of a BlackBerry or cell phone. Montaigne explains why many people fear being alone. He says this, "Our minds are restless. Our thoughts thrash about and can cause us anxiety." So again, Montaigne points out that when we are alone, it's not unusual that we are overcome by fears and troubling desires and anger and even lust. Well, what's the solution? What's the solution? What can help us to enjoy being alone? And again, use this experience to enrich our lives. Well, I think the Dalai Lama provides much illumination here because he constantly refers to what I'm talking about. And he says this, and I'm quoting the Dalai Lama, "The most important task of a person's life is taming his or her mind." What does that mean? What's he talking about here? Taming the mind. Well, the Dalai Lama says we must engage in self-study to the extent that we observe our thoughts, monitor our thoughts. He says we need to see what we think. We need to see what we think. And we must make an arduous effort to filter out negative thoughts. That's what taming the mind is all about, filtering out negative thoughts. That when we are alone and beset by troubling thoughts, it's imperative that we find antidotes to those troubling thoughts and access thoughts that produce tranquility and even joy. The idea is we must learn to talk to ourselves in a way that results in tranquility and not anxiety. Let me say it again. We must learn to talk to ourselves in a way that results in tranquility and not anxiety. Montaigne's own words: "You are no more to concern yourself with how the world talks to you, but rather how you are to talk to yourself." Montaigne believed that to think more clearly, one of the things that it's incumbent upon us that we do is to develop perspective. And what does that mean? Well, perspective means that we have to come to some determination as to what is really important in life. That so often we attach importance to certain aspects of life that really aren't very important. That so often we tend to exaggerate the trivial. And the idea is that if we can develop perspective, if we can really understand what's truly important in life and what's not, that's going to go a long way to help us to live a fulfilling life. Sigmund Freud claimed that people generally underestimate what is of true value in life. Here are Freud's own words: "It is impossible to escape the impression that people commonly use false standards of measurement, that they seek power, success, and wealth for themselves and admire them in others, and that they underestimate what is of true value in life." I have no doubt that Montaigne and Thomas Merton and the great spiritual thinkers and spiritual teachers in history would agree with Sigmund Freud. Montaigne, in a kind of summary statement concerned what I've said so far in this program, commented, and I'm quoting him, "Fix your soul in certain and limited thoughts wherein she may please herself." And he continues, "If one understands what's of true value in life, one will enjoy life much more." There are, of course, alternative ways of enjoying solitude. We can, for example, when we are alone, aim for a state of flow. And what's that? Well, first of all, let me tell you how we engage in a state of flow, and then I'll explain exactly what it is. We can access a state of flow, or at least try to, by concentrating on an activity, such as reading, writing, carpentry, gardening, cooking, playing a musical instrument. The idea is, when we are alone, if we can concentrate on some activity, we can get the noise out of our minds. In fact, I find, and I know other people whom I've talked to who can get themselves into this state of flow, while they're in this state, they forget about time and they forget about their problems. Again, because they're so focused on a particular activity. It can be intellectual, such as reading, but it doesn't have to be. Another way of enjoying solitude, which again so many of the great thinkers have talked about, is engaging in a kind of meditation, whereby we concentrate, for example, on our breathing, or we concentrate on a word. The Buddhists often concentrate on the word Om, Om, and repeat it many times, and they find that that often helps them get the noise out of their minds and helps them access tranquility. Some people like to meditate on a picture, where you don't even have to be looking at the picture. You can imagine the picture in your mind's eye. It could be a picture of Buddha, of Jesus, of Gandhi, a picture of a little child, which might help you to access tranquility. But again, the idea is when we meditate, that we're not concentrating so much on an activity such as reading or gardening, but rather, again, concentrating on something else, such as our breathing or a picture, even a quotation. One of the things I do just about every morning of my life is to mull over certain quotations. I've mentioned this to you before. In my bedroom, in my kitchen, in my study, I have 3x5 cards on which I've written quotes that I want to remember. Quotes from Shakespeare, from Buddha, from Jesus, from Thomas Merton, from Freud, from Adler, from Nietzsche, etc. And I find that when I meditate on these quotations, even without looking at them very often, because I've memorized so many of them, that can help pitch me to a higher state of tranquility. Again, all of what I'm talking about is a way of helping ourselves to enjoy being alone. Among the aids, by the way, that you might search out, aids to help us understand what we can do to being alone, are books on Buddhism and also books on yoga. Books on yoga. By the way, I engage in both kinds of activities every day, where I concentrate on an activity such as reading, usually, and writing, but also at another time of the day, I will concentrate on my breathing or a quotation, as I mentioned, or a picture that helps pitch me to a high level of tranquility. Also, I want to mention this to people who have never tried this. Don't get discouraged if when you first try to do this, you don't succeed to the degree that you want to. It takes weeks, months, even years to really get very good at doing this, at concentrating on an activity or on meditating. But measure your progress each month, or maybe every couple of months. And I think you will see that every month you're making a little bit of progress in accessing higher levels of tranquility and reducing the anxiety in life, and again, getting a lot of the noise out of one's mind. I'll have much more to say about Montaigne in my next program on him, but right now I see I'm running short on time. So as is my custom, I'd like to end with a quotation from Henry David Thoreau. Thoreau, in Walden, his masterpiece, wrote the following: "To affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts."